We're going to be in Exodus one more time today, in Exodus chapter 20. So our first sermon for 2022 is the final sermon in our Principles Over Privilege series. And we're going to recap just a little bit by looking at the final 5 of the 10 Commandments. And then from here, next week, I hope to launch into a series that I've titled Being a Better Human. So we'll see about that next week. But for right now, principle over privilege has been the idea that our society today is consumed with individual rights. And individual rights are good. As Americans, we're all about individual rights and freedoms. But it's gotten to a point where people have become very entitled, right? There's an entitlement mentality. And everybody wants whatever they think their rights ought to be, and your rights don't matter anymore, right? So it's become that. It's become all about privilege instead of living by principles. And so over the last number of weeks, we've used the 10 Commandments as the basis for saying that your rights, especially as a believer, the whole deal of surrendering your life to Christ is you surrender your rights to Him as well, right? You set those aside for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of others. And so, to put it another way, other people have rights too, and your rights don't get to stomp on the rights of others. So in order to live the right way, we live by principles that God has given us. And so the second half of the 10 Commandments really speak to this as we see principles for living at peace with all people. And so here they are from Exodus 20, verses 13 through 17. It's Commandments 6 through 10. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. And you must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So you don't have the right to take the life of other people. You don't have the right to murder anybody. You don't have the right to run people over or randomly shoot in a crowd or something like that, because other people have the right to live, right? You don't have the right to be in an intimate relationship with someone else's spouse. They have a right to a peaceful, happy home. You don't have the right to take the stuff of others. Other people have the right to feel secure about their property and their belongings, okay? And so we've talked about each of those things in previous sermons. And so what I want to focus on more today is the final 2 commandments, that we don't have a right to testify falsely against our neighbor, and we don't have the right to covet our neighbor's stuff. And so we're going to look at being a good neighbor, but I'm going to look at it from this vantage point, what it takes to be a bad neighbor. And there's a couple of things here. The first thing is falsely accusing other people. That's a bad neighbor right there. You're going to falsely accuse others. This command that we should not testify falsely or bear false witness against our neighbor relates to Israel's covenant community. I want you to think about it in those terms and their justice system. And in that day, it took 2 witnesses to convict somebody. And that conviction could lead to death, as Israel practiced the death penalty in their system. So if one person lied about someone else, bringing an accusation against them, there had to be a second person who was also willing to lie about them in order for that person to be convicted on a false accusation. So this was considered, to do this was such a violation that if found out, those people could perhaps be executed. If the penalty for that accusation or that the crime they were accusing someone of was death, then they could be sentenced to death for falsely accusing. So we get that from Deuteronomy 19, verses 16 through 20. If a malicious witness comes forward and accuses someone of a crime, then both the accuser and the accused must appear before the Lord by coming to the priest and judges in office at that time. The judges must investigate the case thoroughly. If the accuser has brought false charges against his fellow Israelite, you must impose on the accuser the sentence he intended for the other person. In this way, you will purge such evil from among you. Then the rest of the people will hear about it and be afraid to do such an evil thing. Now, wouldn't that be something in our day? To say, okay, if you're going to bring an accusation against somebody, it better be true, because if not, you're going to suffer the consequences of what you're accusing them of having done. That would probably turn some people around, don't you think? If we handle things, and that's why they handle things that way. Because remember, God was preserving their covenant community, their nation, and that was a way to do that. So it was a big deal in establishing Israel as a nation. And remember, there can't be justice for anybody if people can get away with falsely accusing others. If they get away with that, I mean, then there is no justice. So we could spend hours citing incidences of people in our culture today and in years past who are falsely accused and their lives turned upside down, their lives destroyed even due to false accusations. Sometimes those kind of accusations come from people who are angry, who have an axe to grind with that person. Other times it's the oversight or incompetence of criminal investigators that lead to somebody's false arrest and imprisonment. I saw a stat this week that indicated that almost 200 people that have been on death row since about 1973, almost 200 of them were found to be innocent of the charges that got them convicted after further investigation. Now, so that means somebody brought false charges against them and they were convicted for it. But think about even beyond that. The people who are accused of lesser crimes that wouldn't lead to the death penalty, right? Who were accused and were really innocent. And then the thousands upon thousands of people who just lied about, right? Somebody just, again, has something against them, so they just tell false things about them. I mean, that happens on a regular basis. And of all the things that people can do to hurt one another, I think that false accusations might be among the most disturbing, because in many cases, even just the accusation can lead to terrible outcomes for the one accused, even if they're innocent. So especially now with social media, right, what we call the court of public opinion, sometimes an individual doesn't stand a chance of living a normal, quiet life after having been accused of something, whether they were guilty or not. So you cannot be a good neighbor. You can't be a good human being if you're willing to falsely accuse other people of doing wrong. That's a special kind of evil at work in that case. And I want to add that even when a person doesn't specifically identify the accused, it's still a problem. So in other words, when somebody says that, oh, well, someone must have done whatever. Someone must have stolen something. Someone must have, and they don't identify an individual. To me, that's still a problem, especially if they know that that's not the case, right? And people will do that as well. So what does the Lord say about lies beyond this kind of a situation, these false accusations? Well, Proverbs 6:16 through 19, I'm sure you're familiar with it, says there are 6 things the Lord hates. No, 7 things he detests: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong, a false witness who pours out lies, a person who sows discord in a family. So twice, right? A lying tongue and a false witness who pours out lies. 2 kinds of lying, he indicates there, are a problem. Proverbs 12:22, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. Proverbs 19:9, a false witness will not go unpunished, and a liar will be destroyed. Psalm 101:7, I will not allow deceivers to serve in my house, and liars will not stay in my presence. And let me remind you, like I mentioned to the kids this morning, Jesus experienced false accusations that led to his execution. And here's what he said about lies when addressing the fact that the Pharisees didn't believe what he spoke. Jesus told them, this is, I didn't write down I think it's in Matthew 5, I want to say, but apparently I did not write that in my notes. So Jesus told them, if God were your father, you would love me, because I have come to you from God. I am not here on my own, but he sent me. Why can't you understand what I'm saying? It's because you can't even hear me. For you are the children of your father the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it's consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So Jesus went so far as to identify the root of all lies, and that is the father of lies, the enemy, the evil one, the devil. So let's not only be truth tellers, as we should be, let's also be aware of those who would have this propensity to falsely accuse other people and to try to help protect our friends and neighbors and relatives from such people. So that's a way to be a bad neighbor, falsely accusing others. It's a horrid type of things to do. But another way to be a bad neighbor is coveting the stuff and the people who belong to others, right? Coveting the stuff and the people who belong to others. Again, Exodus 20:17. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Now, an interesting thing about this command is that it's the only one that deals with, of the 10, it's the only one that deals with our thought life and our attitudes as opposed to an action. Right? We've had do not steal, do not murder. Those are things, don't do these actions. This is don't covet, don't have this desire. And so it's similar to what Jesus did with other commands when he said things, and this is from Matthew 5, verses 21 through 22. Jesus said, "You have heard that our ancestors were told you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell." So Jesus took the wrongful act and he elevated the prohibition to even having a thought. Even having the thought, Jesus said, is a problem. It's a sin. It's wrong. And in this case, the thought of being angry at someone. And so it's similar to what we see here in Exodus with this 10th commandment. Not only should you not steal from your neighbor, but you should not even desire his stuff. So what does it mean to desire or to covet someone else's stuff? So let me answer it this way. Is it wrong to want stuff? No, it's not. It's not wrong to want stuff, right? It's okay to want a house or to want a car or a truck or whatever. But when I want Charlie's truck, I want Mitzi's car. Well, now there's an issue. Why do I want what's theirs? Can I not work to get my own thing, my own car, my own truck, my own house? Well, yeah, that's the point. It goes back to what we said about stealing last week. Stealing is taking something you didn't work for or have given to you, right? And so coveting is wanting something you didn't work for or that hasn't been given to you. So it's not just that you want to own a house or you want to have a car to drive or you want a job or a shirt, right? It's not just that you want those things. That's normal. It's when you want what somebody else has. You want theirs. You have to have theirs. That's what we're talking about. And so people in our culture, well, let me say this, is really about discontent and greed more than anything else. It's about not trusting God to provide for your life. What you have, you feel like isn't good enough. You should have something else. You want what someone else has, and you think you deserve what they have. And so now we're back to that idea of entitlement or privilege. People in our culture today have a big problem with discontent and greed. I've read some articles lately, which is interesting, about a growing dislike of capitalism among younger people. And the language can get very accusational and vicious among this group of people. They despise big corporations. And if your company grows to a size that they deem as too large, then they're convinced that you are robbing people and treating your employees like slaves. You have to be, or else you wouldn't be as big as you are. That's kind of the mentality behind it. And they will be quick to tell you that they believe that the system of capitalism is the problem. There are 1.5 million people who are part of an online discussion group on this topic. And at first when I found it, I thought they were just people who didn't want to work, They were against working. They just wanted the money to be given to them or something. But I discovered that there are actually people who are, like I said, against capitalism. The problem is they don't seem to understand that the alternatives to capitalism are far worse than the worst form of capitalism. They don't seem to get that. And the reality is that even if you could point to problems within capitalism, and you can, capitalism itself isn't the problem. Greed and discontent are the problem. And forgetting to treat other people the way you'd like to be treated, that's a problem. That's not the fault of capitalism. So they're blaming the system when the system isn't the problem. The problem is people not living the right way, people not living by godly principles. So with the whole of that, what can we do? How can we be better neighbors and better people? How can we live by principles rather than privilege in relation to these two commandments in particular? In order to do this, we need to keep all 10 of the commandments in perspective. And here's what Jesus said in Matthew 5, verses 17 through 20. He said, "Don't misunderstand why I've come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose, to fulfill it. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So we keep in mind that why Jesus came, and that he didn't come to abolish the law. He came to lift the standard to a higher level, like we talked about in weeks prior. He came to lift up the standard to a standard of love, a very high standard of love. Love for God and love for other people. This is why he could say all the commandments and all the writings of the prophet boil down to these two things. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love others. Bottom line, that's it. Higher standard. Higher standard. Matthew 5 again, verse 43. Jesus said, "You've heard that the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you." Now, who really wants to love their enemies? You know, when somebody does something wrong to you, something mean-spirited, something ugly, your first thought is not, "Oh, how I love them." That's not what you're thinking. You're thinking about how you can retaliate. You're thinking about how you can get them back. You're thinking about how you can set them straight. That's what you're thinking. Jesus said, "No, I understand." I mean, if anybody could have retaliated, right, against false accusers, it was Jesus. He didn't. He said, no, love them. What? Yeah, higher standard. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. And if Jesus were here today, he'd say he put the cold and the wind on the just and the unjust as well. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you're kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you ought to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So again, it all comes down to love. The Apostle Paul was well aware of this when he wrote the following in his letter to the Christians in Rome. He wrote this in Romans 13, 8 through 10. "Owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law." Wow, interesting. "For the commandments say you must not commit adultery, you must not murder, you must not steal, you must not covet. These and other such commandments are summed up in this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to others, so love fulfills the requirements of God's law." That Paul was a smart guy, wasn't he? So the problem we face today is not a pandemic or a virus that brought it about. It's not our politicians, although our politicians can seem to be a problem from time to time, right? Our problem today is not capitalism or socialism or communism. Our problem today is that after all this time, from the time of Moses to the time of Jesus, all the way to our day to day, all this time, our problem is we still don't know how to love. That's what being a good neighbor is all about. This is the greatest of all the commandments and all of the principles by which we can live. Love God, love others. Do you want to be a better neighbor? Learn to love better. 1 Corinthians 13, you're familiar with it. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy and I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. So thinking about a new sermon series, being a better human being, it starts with that concept right there. Being a better neighbor starts with love. Being a better human really starts and ends with this idea of love. It is a new standard that Jesus gave us, a new command, a higher one. Didn't do away with the others. He just lifted them to a new level. Let's love one another. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your love and grace and mercy and forgiveness in our lives. Thank you for how much you have poured your love out on us. And God, help us to remember that in the good days and in the bad days, that you love us more than we can ever imagine. And Father, help us to exhibit even just a little bit of that love towards others so that we can be more like you each and every day. For it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.